This episode of the Apples to Apples podcast is brought to you by SeatGeek. SeatGeek makes the process of purchasing tickets off the secondary market hassle-free. Whether it be a sporting event, concert, theater event, or anything else you can think of, SeatGeek's got you covered. I also got you covered with my new discount code Apples to Apples. You could use it at checkout for 20% off your first purchase off the SeatGeek app. Once again, sporting event, concert, anything you may have coming up on the schedule, use code Apples to Apples for 20% off your first purchase using SeatGeek. All right, what's up, New York? How's it going? I'm Ross Vacaturo, bringing you guys the 57th episode of the Apples to Apples podcast. It has been almost a month to the day I record this since I last did one of these. Just kind of a little bit of a reset. I actually did one of those darkness retreats. I'm just messing with you. We're going to get into the whole scoop around a guy who did one of those, who's notorious for doing one of those in a little bit. But, all kidding aside, just kind of essentially, I brought up the word a reset, just, with the whole postseason going on, taking the hiatus with the Mets postseason going on. Should have probably put one out with the Yankees going on their run, but it's whatever. Didn't really miss much on the football front until right around now, so I felt like this was a good time to come back up to the surface, if you will, with uploading onto this channel and just overall, with some of the storylines going on. I mean, you got the same redundancy with the MLB offseason. I mean, how many times we're going to talk about the name Juan Soto? I felt like I was doing it this past offseason with Shohei Ohtani, even Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Neither of which signed in the city, both went out to Los Angeles and won World Series titles in their first season with the Dodgers. So, we'll talk about Soto in a little bit, but it's basically the same old at this point. Red Sox in on him, Toronto in on him, Philly in on him, Mets, Yankees coming down to those two, the whole yada yada, Heyman, Morosi, all that. I want to mainly focus in on the football. And it's like I said, it's felt like the perfect time to come back to, uploading on this channel. When you think of New York football, right, you think of, for a lot of people, there's probably anything, resembling a two-word phrase coming to mind when they think of New York football, and that's rock bottom. It always feels like, week in, week out, any given Sunday, you throw on a Jet or Giant game. These past couple of years, specifically on the Jet front, it feels like they haven't been on Sundays because of the preseason expectation of what they thought the Jets would be. And now this is the second year now. I'd say last year, because of the ACL or the Achilles injury, maybe there was something to it. They didn't realize how many of those games would be so insignificant down the road with Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle under center. That was one thing. But when you see the absolute shit show that has been this season, it's nothing aside from these networks having egg on their face, realizing, holy hell, how did we fall for it, thinking that, this Jets team would be the anomaly. And they're an anomaly, all right. So I brought up that word rock bottom. It feels like, you hear the phrases similar to the Mets. You hear same old Jets, the LOL Jets, right? All the jokes here and there. You could take so-and-so off the Jet, or you could take the Jets out of so-and-so, but you can't take so-and-so off the Jets. You know where I'm getting at. Regardless, when you bring in Rodgers last year, the 4 plays and all this, he never winds up playing last year. So a lot of people look at this year as the clean slate, as the second coming of, you name it, Broadway Joe, whoever. This guy is the Lord and Savior of Fireman Ed and company. The Jet fan that has suffered through all the names is Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson, even Geno Smiths of the world. This is the guy. Albeit 40, this is the guy, because it worked in Denver, worked in Tampa. Why can't it work in East Rutherford, right? Well, we're currently sitting at a team that's 3-8. I mean, each loss seeming worse than the one prior in a multitude of ways. I mean, while I'm recording this, the most recent one was the Colt loss. I mean, that feels like the biggest kick to the nuts, and that's coming off getting your teeth knocked out in Arizona. You beat Houston of all teams, which, they're kind of a disappointment in their own right, the Texans are, but at least they're leading their division. They're over 500. You go through the line. I mean, Denver, prior to them looking like serious contenders, they were like a 5.5 win-loss prop going into the year. Week 3, they beat the Jets 10-9. Probably the worst one, I said, is probably the Colts, probably the worst one. The worst one is probably the Halloween. The week prior to Halloween, the loss up in New England. There was some Dan Orlovsky put out a tweet. If I clip this, I'll put the screenshot on the clip. Dan Orlovsky put out a tweet. It was like the first time in a 250 game sample size where the team that led in like every significant category in the game lost that particular game. Up until that day, they were like 250-0, and then once that game went final, it was 250-1. The New York Jets were that singular one. It was incredible. Incredible. We're a team that, you look at the ins and outs of that game specifically. The Jets outplayed New England. I'm not talking that up to be some impressive feat, because if you were a Jets team going in, and by the way, they were like 7.5 point favorites going into that game. Patriots were a touchdown dog on their own turf. It was the first time the Jets were given a touchdown plus in like 20 years, either on the road or just in general. I think it was just in general, but regardless, a decade plus of not being a touchdown favorite, and they lost the game outright. It was, I think, New England's second win of the year, and this was the second of the two. They had the series. The first one was the Thursday night game. Was that week 3? Yeah, week 3. They beat the Pats at MetLife. It was on Thursday Night Football, and it was like 24-3. It was a convincing win, but again, a New England team that nobody and their mother had hopes for. So you're not going to go bragging down the street that you beat this horrid Patriots team, but you did beat them week 3 Thursday night. And just like the talk of the town, Jets Twitter, everybody saying we're back. This is the QB we were all waiting for. And it felt like, hold your horses a little bit. You beat a Patriot team that is just beyond shit, right? And if they start off the year 2-1, they're now 3-8. So a little quick math here, and they're now 1-7 in their last 8 games. And since that New England game, they lost their head coach out in Europe, no less. They fired him out, during after following one of the England games, and they lost to Minnesota. They fired their head coach out in Europe. They just fired their GM. So the whole solid Douglas connection, you fire one, you fire the other, you fire both at the same time. They get fired the same season, but about like 4 to 5 weeks apart. Now there's all the quotes and the info getting leaked that Joe Douglas is, I guess you want to say, title as general manager was essentially a de facto one, or kind of vice versa. Like his role as general manager had just been a namesake for the past year. There's like a whole thing that he was trying to trade Alan Lazard to Denver for Jerry Jeudy, and Woody Johnson shot it down. Woody Johnson was like basically enforced the Devontae Adams trade going through, which, by the way, it's incredible to think that someone who got traded from the Las Vegas Raiders would land in a worse situation. And I have no problem saying the Jets are a worse situation, because the Raiders are a disaster in their own right, but they are not wasting just prime talent essentially across the board on their roster. I mean, their depth chart, talking about the Raiders, it's essentially Max Crosby, and that's it. You can nitpick a couple guys. Or I forgot Brock Bowers. So Max Crosby, Brock Bowers, their secondary ain't the worst in the league, but you really got to dive deep to find talent on that Raider roster. So they are playing up to par for how that roster shapes up. When you look at that Jet roster, you don't need me to tell you that is not a 3-8 team, not a 3-8 team. And I know a lot of those guys are 30 plus, 35 plus even. A-Rod obviously comes to mind. Tyron Smith's pretty up there in age. Hassan Reddick's got to be getting up there. So these are not young bloomers. Some of them are. Some of them are, and the ones that are on the younger side of things and are also underperforming, cough, cough, Ahmad Gardner. And yes, Ahmad, because if you ask a Jet fan, seems like half the fan base is unanimously agreed that they just like stripped the sauce name tag away from him. Like it was like a one of those, it's a privilege, not a right, having the sauce nickname. Just funny now because you can't walk into a Buffalo Wild Wings around here without seeing his big ass smile the second you walk through the vestibule. And now no Jet fan will acknowledge his nickname as being Sauce because of how shit he's been this year. So now he's Ahmad Gardner. But you have the Gardners and Brees Hall for a while. There was a whole thing about Brees splitting touches with Braylon Allen. Garrett Wilson's been like the one. I can't even say the whole year. Garrett Wilson, ironically, right before the season went to a total dumpster fire, felt like Garrett Wilson was underperforming while the season still had some hope. Rodgers was getting the ball to Lazard more than he was getting it to Wilson, and then they brought in Adams, and there were reports that they were potentially going to shop Garrett Wilson and make Devontae the number one target. But nonetheless, Wilson's kind of come into his own right. He had the insane one-handed catch in the Houston game. And that game is the only reason they're not 0-8 in their last 8 games, which, by the way, even in that game, you had to play with the blanket on the receiver's name is a rookie, Malachi Corley, I think it is. Yeah. Who drops the ball prior to the goal line, about to do a celebration, drops the ball before he crosses the line, and they wipe it off the board. And a rookie is what I'm talking about with Gardner, a rookie. It's obviously you don't expect it from a vet. I mean, Kyle Pitts did it the week prior in Atlanta, and they won that game too. The Falcons did. But I mean, if you're a rookie, you're seeing your vets are obviously rusting up. And Rodgers, I brought up before, Peyton Manning got a ring out of Denver. Tom Brady got a ring out of Tampa. Aaron Rodgers' legacy as a New York Jet is just going to be a flash in the pan, or even if it's not, it is not going to be remembered for a good reason in the slightest. In the slightest. Hell, we thought Brett Favre's tenure as a Jet couldn't be topped. We may have found someone that could top it. The ayahuasca-riddled, darkness retreat, hiding lunatic that is Aaron Rodgers quit Jeopardy, left the only town he ever knew, because at least Brett Favre had a 2-week hike in Atlanta. All Rodgers ever knew was Green Bay, Wisconsin, and here he comes to the Meadowlands, and essentially, you see the jokes going around. He is essentially now the quarterback, head coach, and general manager all wrapped into one of an NFL football team. He's the NFL's Holy Trinity. And instead of being the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, he's an ayahuasca smuggling lunatic. And you just throw him into the fire of the team that's most simultaneous with finding a way to screw every single thing they get their hands on up. It's like it's a match made in heaven, if you think about it, honestly. I mean, you think of, I hate to, go down this path even further, but if you want to throw the apostle aspect into it, he might as well have brought in all 12. He brought in Lazard. He brought in Randall Cobb. He brought in Nate Hackett. Might as well be John the Baptist. I don't know. Holy hell. I just put this connection together. Aaron Rodgers thinks he's Jesus. Aaron Rodgers thinks he's Jesus. He brought in all his apostles from Green Bay. Right? And he made sure the coach and GM were fired so he could be all three wrapped in one. That is unbelievable, man. I am not kidding around with you guys. I didn't have that scripted. I clicked all those dots together in about 2 minutes. That is just unbelievable when you think about that. Listen, Brady. People would get on Brady for the diet, right? He had a name for it, but he had some like psychotic diet. He like doesn't eat any bread or any like carbs, nothing like that. It's no alcohol. It's like strict by the book, word for word. Like he doesn't have no exceptions, no cheat days, and people are appalled by it, but it works. And he's a winner. He's got more rings than any team, any franchise has rings. Tom Brady's got more. And that, speaks volumes to the kind of player he is. Peyton Manning, I don't think there's a lot of lingo on him, the person he is. Aaron Rodgers is notorious for just being a psychopath. So, while I might be kidding around here with this thought process, I would not be surprised if there's some legitimacy to it. I mean, hell, when they were interviewing him after the game, he's talking about the darkness is darkest when it's light out or some shit like that. I don't even know. I don't even know what he was talking about. And I thought he was putting two and two together with the darkness retreat, and he probably was. But I mean, this whole thing with the light and the 12 apostles. This guy is a certified lunatic, and you throw him into a mix of a team that a front office, Woody Johnson. I'm saying there's probably Jet fans, regardless of what they believe politically, we're probably running to those polls to go vote for Trump to get Woody Johnson's ass overseas. Because when Trump gets into office, Woody Johnson's going to be an ambassador for England or one of those countries out in Europe. And then comes Christopher Johnson, who's really not much better, but I mean, anything, you got to try anything at this point, right? It's basically essentially trash versus garbage. At some point, you got to take the trash out, got to change it up. So if garbage has to come in, and he's a lateral shift, I'm not sure, but at least he has showed something. Because whatever the hell Woody Johnson's doing right now, it's not working. And you could see too, by the way, one more quick thing, and then I gotta hit the Giants because I don't want to go too long in this episode, but there's an insane amount of stuff going on with the football. One last thing with Woody, you notice when Salah got fired, they asked him about it, and something about like, you've been in the news. One of the reporters went up to him talking about like being in the news. He was being like a real like essentially a condescending asshole about it. Like, oh, I've been in the news, stuff like that, right? And it really reminded me of Steve Cohen last year when he did that emergency press conference. It was in August when the season was totally shot, but we just needed a pulse from ownership, a pulse from the front office, and he gave it to us. But one quote that bothered a lot of fans, myself included, I don't say bothered, but it was definitely an eyebrow raiser, was they were talking about, the Mets being in fourth place in the division despite all the heavy preseason expectations. And they asked him about being in fourth place. He essentially said, well, it's not fifth place, right? And a lot of people are like, what the hell are you talking about? That's a loser mentality, one-on-one, all that, joking around. And then when you got an owner in Woody Johnson, who, and everybody knows Salah, his seat was basically hot since the start of last year, minus like the first 2 weeks. And there was the crowd, you got to give him a pass. He doesn't have a QB all over again. He got dealt a bad hand of cards, stuff like that. You gotta lay off a little bit. You say, all right, but to fire him, what was it, 5 weeks into this year? And when they ask you about it, you say, oh, I'm in the, like, he's kidding around. And he's saying, oh, well, we needed to change the scenery, which is kind of what I'm saying too, just kind of changing anything around. You don't do it 5 weeks into the season, man. They were 2-3 at that point. Their two of their three losses. They had the loss to San Fran early on. Week 1 was a blowout, but I brought up the Denver loss, was a terrible loss, but you were in it. I mean, if Zerline hits a field goal, which, by the way, Zerline went from kind of getting let off the hook each game. You play the old, one field goal doesn't tell the story of the entire game. If you got a kicker missing a clutch field goal, oh, we could have done this, and that better. You can't put it all on the kicker. Well, that went sailing out the window when you had like a 4-week stretch where Zerline may have been sub 500 on his kicking percentage, on his successful kick percentage. He missed 2 in that New England game. He missed the PAT. He missed the field goal. He missed the field goal, albeit pretty long distance against Denver, but would have won him the game. A couple others here and there scattered. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but long story short, it just became such a reoccurring thing with Zerline that he lost that benefit of the doubt. Right. And then there was the whole thing about they didn't protect their newest kicker, and then Kansas City just took him because Bucker went on the IR. So they can't even protect a kicker on their depth chart. All you need to know. But kind of circling back to Woody Johnson, kind of holding on to that same, showing a pulse in any way, shape, or form, showing some sort of life that you're not doing the same old in the front office. At the same time, I don't think you do it after 5 games. I don't think you do it after being 2 or 3 when 2 of those losses, I know it's a cliche, but 2 of those losses could have been flipped to wins. You could have been 4-1. And if you want to say the Tennessee win was close, they could have been 1-4. That's fine as well. But if Saleh wasn't bad enough to fire him last year, or at least in the offseason, I don't know why you make that move 5 weeks into a year where you're finally seeing Rodgers. You're finally seeing the stuff click somewhat. You know damn well, and I guess it kind of New Orleans kind of contradicts it. You see Darren Rizzi, uh, Saints intern, what he's been able to do. They won their first 2 on the year, lost 7 straight, got Dennis Allen the hell out of there, which should have happened 2 years ago. You want to talk about people getting fired way, way, way too late. Dennis Allen is putrid. Darren Rizzi comes in, they win 2 straight. They beat Atlanta and they just beat Cleveland. Ulbrich, he's got Darren Rizzi's got more wins in 2 weeks than Ulbrich has in 6 weeks. And each loss felt like it got worse than the next. I mean, the New England game, I brought up outplayed them every facet of the game and lost the game. I think that was the game where they used all 3 of their timeouts, first half timeouts, in the first quarter. I can't remember the last time I saw that. The Cardinal game, just complete unpreparedness, lack of preparation. The Colt game, starting off just asleep at the wheels, like 13-0. Then you finally see a jolt of life, and you see Anthony Richardson, who the week prior was getting just like laughed at by every single NFL fan there is for quitting the sport. As he said, I'm too tired for this shit. He sounded like me in grade school, AAU basketball, whatever the hell those makeshift leagues are called. Yeah, AAU. Me being the third string center, I'll coach. I need a breather. I'm not a starting quarterback for an NFL team, which, by the way, that game Richardson needed out of wound up being a 1-score game. And then comes Joe Flacco. Now seems like the Bills out on Flacco because, look, he turned the Browns around. Even when he was with the Jets, he wasn't that bad. And people were saying, why did you let go of him? You had the story with Mike White. Want to be like Mike. You had Tim Boyle, who did little to nothing for you aside for the Bloody Mary, the Hail Mary, whatever it's called, on Black Friday, which we're nearing up on a year on. That's insane. The first Black Friday game throws the Hail Mary to end the half, and it gets taken back for 99 yards. But Anthony Richardson was done with the sport, it looked like. People wrote him off because he voluntarily left the field. And that's the guy you let go 99 yards and win a game against you? I don't know if it was 99 exactly, but you let that guy march down the field in crunch time, and they beat you. I think it was one or two. It was a 1-score game. They needed a field goal. All they needed was a field goal to win the game, and Rodgers gets sacked to end the game. The clock run off on the clock, and it's over. You know what? And it feels like people say how many times you fire a coach, intern brings them to the playoffs. A lot of people cited Rich Bisaccia with the Raiders. And there's a couple other instances here and there. I think Bruce Arians might have done it with the Colts. I'm not sure. And who knows? I mean, Darren Rizzi, the way they're playing, the Saints might do it. But it sure as hell ain't going to happen with the Jets because Jeff Ulbrich looks like a stuck duck calling plays. I wouldn't be surprised if they let him go outright, let alone throw him back to the Wolves with the DC gig because, I mean, I don't know how, he could show up for work next year. They're in him bad. It's not even his fault. I just brought up the expression, he got thrown to the Wolves. And he's essentially the punching bag. Because I don't know who else there is now. Everybody's talking about Rex Ryan, right? He's got one foot out the door already in terms of coaching gigs, pun intended. People are, GMs, Mike Tannenbaum, John Idzik. I mean, listen, Joe Douglas didn't have the record to his name, but he did more for this team, roster construction wise in 4 years, and those two did combined. And just overall, look, it's never going to change as long as those owners are still there. Thing one, thing two, Beavis and Butthead, whatever you want to call them. But it's just insane how a team with such talent, rosters loaded, and essentially everyone there. I'd say Garrett Wilson's probably the only one that's not is underperforming. And that corner, I'm blanking on his name, is a backup, and he's got their only 2 interceptions on the season. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he's Nichols or no, Brandon Eccles. Eccles, I think it is, has 2 picks. I think it's their only 2 picks on the season. That's just insane for a defense that DJ Reed said was the modern day version of the 85 Bears. All right. So all in all, man, you look at a Jet team and Stephen A. Smith, I guess this is a segue, said the only reason the Giants get let off the hook is because the only team that's more dysfunctional shares a city with them. We just covered them. Let's talk about, we're talking about the Jets being the 32nd least dysfunctional team in the NFL. Let's talk about number 31, the New York Football Giants. The end of the reign of Daniel Jones. You can mark it down on your calendars, November 22nd, 2024. If you want to go back a couple days earlier, he put out that farewell address, like the Gettysburg Address, talking about, same old yada yada. I didn't take this opportunity for granted. It was an honor, a privilege. People are saying he was a class act about it. I can't remember the last time someone departed a team and was ready to throw hands and made a scene. More often than not, I'd say about 95% of the time, these players leave with class, at least in front of the media, leave with class. And the 5% that don't, you just don't hear from them again. So what Jones did, I don't think is anything new. In terms of the production on the field, you don't need me to tell you that I think statistically across the board, maybe not every column, but if you were to average every significant quarterback stat in the NFL, Daniel Jones was probably the worst starting quarterback for the better part of his 6-year run in New York. And I don't think that's hyperbole whatsoever. 2022, it's the anomaly. If you really want to dig deep into each specific game of 2022, even then, he was nothing off the charts. I'd say there were a couple lists, at most a couple, that would have him squeak into the top 10. Because I saw there's a couple morons on Twitter that were like the resident Daniel Jones stan accounts. You know what I mean? Like he could do no wrong. I talked about Aaron Rodgers being Jesus. They might as well have crowned Daniel Jones Jesus in their eyes. Oh, it's the offensive line's fault. He has no targets, this, that. Hell, they run out of excuses. It's, the sun, the moon. It's not a crescent moon. It stays undefeated when there's a crescent moon. It's just shit like that. You know what I mean? Like the stat moose kind of stuff. And just overall, it was just a 6+ year run of nothing but just like an excuse fest, right? I hear people call into WFAN. There was one guy called into Chris McMonagle on overnights. It stuck with me. He said, I think we're getting close to the point where you have to cut ties with Daniel Jones. I think we're getting close. This was like this week. I mean, this should have happened. Listen, he doesn't have that anomaly of a 22-year. He's out the door right then and there. He's going up to the season playing for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He's playing CFL or XFL. Was it Seattle Dragons or the I'm blanking on like the New York Guardians we had here a couple years ago. I think they moved. We couldn't even hold the net. So our 2 NFL teams are dysfunctional as hell, and then the XFL team wanted no part of the city. Listen, I think they moved to 22. So had Daniel Jones not made the playoffs, he probably would have bought himself a one-way ticket on the New York/Orlando Guardian team plane, and he would have been balling out down in Orlando. but they saw him in that game in Minnesota. You know me being a Minnesota, Viking fan. We are the reason Daniel Jones played another season and a half of NFL football, or at least starting NFL football. And I always say, I see Giant fans talking online. I say, listen, Minnesota may have lost the battle, but the Giants are the ones that lost the war. The Giants, every Giant fan that looked at that wild card game, keep in mind a franchise that won a Lombardi 10 years ago and won another one 5 years prior to that, maybe one of the most memorable Super Bowl runs to date. The helmet catch, David Tyree and all that, Patriots not going undefeated. The whole, the underdog story, everything about that run memorable from start to finish. 2012 as well. Eli getting the better part of Brady a second time around. Everything to it, phenomenal. Manning has 2 rings. Giants have 4 as a franchise. Since then, they have 3 playoff games, 1 win. And the 1 win, every Giant fan and their mother singing Kumbaya and saying, wow, this is great. It took long enough, but we may have our QB1. Think obviously the front office agreed. They pay him the $40 million. They had the opt-out after this year, and the whole thing with the clause was that, if he had any injury whatsoever, any holdup in a physical that would prevent him from playing next year, they would have to lock into the remaining years on his contract. So the opt-out was essentially he was fully healthy come his preseason physical of next season. And this is a guy who was like the operation, like the board game operation last year. They went after his neck. Then he tore the ACL non-contact in Vegas. He couldn't catch a break. So this year, you look at the only miracle of his season so far is that he hasn't gotten hurt. I think they realized you lose to Carolina. They said, that's it. We gotta put the Bucs got to stop somewhere, and it might as well be here. Which I just also realized Robert Saleh and Daniel Jones, 2 of the city's biggest punching bags in recent years, both saw their runs in New York come to an end out in Europe. If I just said the Giant game was England, I meant to say that was Germany. That was a Munich game. The two-win Giants versus 2-win Panthers actually wound up being a solid game going to OT. And Tyrone Tracy, who actually looks like a stud, which is ironic, kind of goes into the point further of, they should have paid Saquon instead. I don't necessarily agree with that. Because, listen, Saquon's putting up MVP-type numbers. He's got that backwards hurdle that everybody's talking about. But Tyrone Tracy's coming into form, and he's been one of the few outlying solid pieces of the season. Few of the other rare positives to take out of this team are also fellow draftees of this year. Malik Neighbors, listen, he was held to a high regard right out of the gates, and he, in a couple games, showed beyond stuff to be happy about. I mean, the Cleveland game, listen, I mean, pros and cons to take out of that one. He was basically accounted for 2 touchdowns himself. Daniel Jones basically tried concussing him 2 or 3 times in the process. Drew Phillips, they drafted later in that draft. He's looked great. And Shane was kind of voiced that. He did a presser the other day. He said in recent years he was drafting more so for needs, and he felt like this year he drafted more for the sake of taking the best guy on the board, which is kind of now begs the question when you look at a QB draft coming up where aside from Shador and Cam Ward and maybe Jalen Milroe, I'm not sure, Quinn Ewers maybe later in the draft, but case in point, this is not the strongest quarterback draft compared to last year so far. You got Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Drake May looking solid. Caleb might be the only disappointment so far, and we haven't even seen McCarthy and Penix yet. So the fact that last year would have been the year to go after a need again, and they settled for the receiver, for a QB draft that's not shaping up to be one of the better ones in recent years, are they going to avoid taking that potential franchise QB once again? I mean, if people say, they're a QB away with some of the pieces, which I'm not entirely sure is the truth. But regardless, you've had a pylon at under center for 5 out of the last 6 years. And the 1 year you didn't have one was a guy who was essentially looking to get set for life. And I think it's safe to say he is. And other than that, it's just been a total zero. So while there's a good chance you drafting a need in QB may not be the best guy on the board, how do you play that out if you're Shane? And even too, listen, Saleh and Douglas got fired when we least expected it. I mean, it felt like it was going to happen any second, but to happen for the coach to go in week 6 and the GM to go in week, what is this now, 12? I could not tell you that was on my bingo card. So I don't know what the future holds for Shane and Dable either. You give Dable a shot. Everyone was talking about his claim to fame was developing Josh Allen. They kind of reached for Allen in Buffalo, and they turned him into the arguable MVP, arguably the current MVP favorite right now, when he was a reach at the time they picked him. And everybody was saying, his first year with Daniel Jones was kind of the same magic, and it just went vroom. It was kind of the same magic in year 1 with Jones, and from that point forward, it just went downhill, and we're at a point where Jones gets released in week 12. He's done. He's finito, finished. They got some dead cap they got to pay off for the rest of the year, and then that's all she wrote. I saw Big Cat was saying this is going to be a guy in a couple of years, we're going to say Daniel Jones was really an NFL starting quarterback for 6 years. It's going to be like one of those obscure, if he ever goes and plays for another team, he's going to be an immaculate grid legend. That's essentially who Daniel Jones is at this point. And if you're Dable and you're Shane, you got to, specifically Dable, you say maybe I do want to crack at developing another, QB, a franchise QB as a head coach this time. Being that he was the OC with Allen in Buffalo. So I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting, but, case in point, I don't want this episode to go too long. New York City football, New York/New Jersey football is just, whenever you think there's a rock bottom, the surface finds a way to just to free fall even more. And of every Jet season in this 13-year drought and counting, this may be the very worst of them. And if you're a Giant fan, when it felt just as hopeless as could be, losing a Carolina team who's got their own problems, Bryce Young, maybe one of the worst first overall picks in recent memory, you find a way to stoop down to their level or even lower and lose to them out in Germany. It's a year to forget if you're a New York football fan in 2024, but I'm going to stop it here. I'm inching in on 40 minutes. So anyway, guys, thanks for listening. Appreciate all the support. No promises, because I know I've said this before in the past, but I'm going to look to post more consistently. And just, essentially, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you next time on the Apples to Apples podcast. See you guys.